Hey, so welcome back to the Thoughtful Advocate podcast. Today we're going to be talking about child labor. One, where it came from. Two, how bad it got. And three, what it looks like today. So stay tuned. So when you hear child labor, what comes to your mind? Maybe images of old black and white photos, little children in their overalls doing chimney sweep, or little kids in factories working on assembly lines with their tiny hands. You'd be right, but the story goes much deeper. Okay, let's start the story from the very beginning. Throughout most of mankind, children work. And as your parents or grandparents would say, it was just the way things were. In colonial America, Puritan values were highly held. That meant hard work over idleness, and this applied to children as well. Children often worked on family farms and as indentured servants. Boys often began apprenticeships between ages 10 to 14 to learn a trade. So there was actually a law called England's Poor Law. This was introduced in 1575. England's Poor Law required local parishes to fund work for the poor and children. The goal was to discourage laziness and poverty. Society back then truly believed that if we put kids to work, it would prevent them from becoming poor. And the real irony is children were already poor back then. So the Industrial Revolution was when things got really bad. In 1793, there was a mill named after Samuel Slater, and basically he built America's first tech mill in Rhode Island. Basically, he built America's first textile mill in Rhode Island. Early records show that many of the workers were children between age 7 and 8. Yikes. And some of the youngest children working there were between ages 7 and 8. Employers love children workers. For one, they're cheaper than adults. 2, they're easy to train because they learn quicker. 3, they're more obedient and compliant. 4, they're less likely to complain or quit. This is a general idea of the horrible working conditions back then. Children worked in mines, glass factories, textile mills, and farms. They also worked as newsboys, messengers, and street vendors, and the work was often dangerous and deadly. Let's dive into a specific example. In the coal mines, children were known as breaker boys. Their job was to pick slate by hand for hours in the coal mines. If you ever worked in a mine, you know it's dangerous. The spaces are often tight and small, and mines often collapse, things fall, rocks. There's also rodents, bats, and who knows what else down there, and it's extremely dark. And there were frequent injuries and deaths from all this. And boys as young as 9 years old would work all day long. Supervisors would beat the kids if they didn't cooperate. Beating back then was very normalized, but that's just. And supervisors would beat the children if they worked too slowly. And this heartbreaking quote from a 9-year-old boy who worked in the mines. And he said, "I always think of my poor blind father and my mother at home, and I won't ever be able to play with the children." In 1870, the first U.S. census reported that child laborers were 750,000 workers under the age of 15. This doesn't include children who worked on the farms for their family or did family businesses. You might be wondering, when did people figure out that having child workers was wrong? So let's talk about the reform movement. It definitely took a while. The movement was initially fueled by the concern of lack of education for children rather than the concern for the dangerous labor they did. It wasn't about, oh, this is really cruel to have children at this age working in mines. It was about, oh, these children can't read. We have a problem. About priorities. So in May 1813, Connecticut passed a law that required children to learn reading, writing, and math. And this was required specifically for employees to provide schooling to teach these things. The law itself never addressed the minimum age or wasn't very specific. One of the big turning points for this movement was in 1908, when a photographer named Lewis Hine was employed by the National Child Labor Committee to document child workers worldwide. His photographs allowed people to see that there were real children working, not just statistics, and to see the horrible working conditions that they were in. In 1903, Mother Jones organized a protest for working children called the March of the Mill Children. The protest took place from Philadelphia to Theodore Roosevelt's summer home in Oyster Bay, New York, and basically demanded better working conditions for children. Progress was slow in general. In 1916, Congress passed the Keating-Owen. Basically, it banned interstate sales of items that were produced by child laborers. But this was revoked 2 years later by the Supreme Court. So all that work was undone. Then finally in 1938, Theodore Roosevelt signed the Fair Labor Standards Act, which included limits on many forms of child labor. The Fair Labor Standards Act also included children ages all the way up to 18, which was huge at this time. And it also listed specific jobs that were too dangerous for them to perform. Okay, so now that we looked at our past, let's look ahead, the future and current day. Though the fight still continues. You probably don't see as many children working in factories or mines, especially in North America. It's definitely unheard of. According to ILO, UNICEF report, child labor remains a huge issue globally, despite the decades of progress. As of 2025, approximately 160 million children are still engaged in child labor worldwide. So that's about 1 in 10 children. And 79 million of these child laborers are specifically engaged in dangerous work. So you're probably thinking, where is this child labor happening? A lot of it's happening in Africa, where about 92 million child laborers continue to work. Then it's followed by Asia, not surprising, and the Pacific. Agriculture, specifically farming, is the largest employer of child laborers. Around 70% of all child laborers are in this sector. And yes, that children working in fields and farms in conditions no child should ever experience. And here's what specifically progress since 2016 reports highlight that climate change, conflict, and economic instability is really worsening the conditions for child laborers. We're not just dealing with old problems, we're also dealing with new problems like climate change, pushing more children into work. And most often, child labor occur when families are in debt and in poverty and they need someone to bring home money. This could also be due to someone in family having illness or loss of caregiver, and the result is basically children have to go to work to cover for the parental loss, and often they don't have any other choice. And sadly, it can lead to slavery and often sexual exploitation, and of course, it cuts children off from very vital accesses to education, so they can't go to school anymore. So what can be done? The UNICEF and ILO are calling for governments to invest in social protection for vulnerable households, strengthen child protection systems, provide universal quality education, and ensure decent work for adults and youth. And this is happening in 2025, which is wild. And just because it's not really happening in your backyard doesn't mean that's not happening. So it's going to take every one of us who really cares to make a change and allow children to be children. Okay, so that was all really heavy, but we're going to talk about something more lighthearted and kind of contrast the story that was just told. This is the culture section. So I'm going to talk about my favorite show and book, Anne with an E, which is the show, and Anne of Green Gables, which is the book. And the reason why Anne of Green Gables in general is so close to my heart is because it just book itself just lets your imagination run wild and allows children to be children. And it also reminds us to speak up for ourselves and to do what's right. It's also very good at capturing the goodness of humanity, which is so much needed. So the story of Anne of Green Gables was written by L.M. Montgomery and published in 1908. That was the same time Louis Hines took those photographs of child laborers around the world. Montgomery was writing about an orphan girl who finally found a home. I thought that's a really interesting timing between the history and what was happening. I don't know Montgomery personally, but there could be a link. Maybe this is maybe that was a hopeful story for children around the world who were working in these terrible conditions. Basically, the story follows Anne, who was an 11-year-old girl with bright red braids. She is very outspoken, has endless amounts of imagination, is a great storyteller, and she's sent to live with Matthew and Martha. She's sent to live with Matthew and Marilla in Prince Edward Island. Originally, they wanted a boy, but they came to love Anne just as much, and they really needed help with the farm work. I think what makes Anne such a relatable character is she has a very fiery temper, like me, and she's often very dramatic and makes mistakes, so she's very human. But she's also creative, kind, intelligent. She deeply cares about her friends and family. The book itself has so many life lessons about forgiveness, family, friendship, and just so many fun adventures that you can imagine having as a child. And it also talks about the ripple effects of how one person can turn on an entire community. So fast forward in 2017, the show Anne with an E, it was released on CBC and Netflix, and basically is a modern take on the Anne of Green Gables story, and I really loved it. That I watched the show first before reading the books, and I loved it so much that I was like, okay, I have to read the books now. And it ran for 3 seasons and then ended, but I wish it kept going, but I think they concluded pretty well. Overall, it's very wholesome, and the characters were so well done. They brought the book life for me. The show deals with a lot of trauma, healing, feminism, racism, even LGBTQ issues, and yeah, even child labor. And so you're probably wondering why I'm talking about Anne of Green Gables, and honestly, this is just an ideal of what childhood should be. Of course, in life, bad stuff does happen, and we just have to learn how to cope with it. But I'm talking about freedom, friendship, family, and all the love she received and gave back. While real children during that time were working in mines and factories, Anne was climbing trees, reciting poetry, imaginary tea parties, creating play, and she got to go to school, get a real education. She was very smart in her class. I often had a tough with Gilbert, who is her love interest. I really enjoyed that the book and show didn't just show a perfect idealization of what childhood should be, but it did string in real problems. And it did often talk about poverty because Marilla and Matthew were amongst one of the poor folks. The underlying message is about kindness, imagination, and community, and how these 3 elements woven together can really create something beautiful. I really love the friendships in this show. Anne and Diane are such great friends and truly devoted to each other, and just the community in general. Like, everyone wants to help one another, and that's the way it should be. In a world where 138 million children are still in child labor, where kids are often denied real education and a real childhood, stories like Anne really gives hope and remind us what we're fighting for. And there's a huge pivotal moment in the book and in the show where Anne, who is an orphan, finally gets accepted by Marilla and Matthew. When she gets told that she can stay, her whole life changes for the better. So it could change for these children out there too. And yes, progress is being made, but there's still so much to do. Make sure you like this episode and share it with a friend and subscribe for more. Okay, so today's sponsor is Kind Laundry. Just kidding, they're not really a sponsor, but I do have an affiliate code. Kind Laundry use natural ingredients, and it actually comes in these sheets. So much more useful than liquid laundry detergent because that stuff gets messy. With Kind Laundry, you can bring this anywhere. It's literally in a box, pack in your suitcase, and it's that easy. You can get 10% off by using code ZeroWasteCute.